Good morning. Welcome again to Morning Devotions, and thank you again so much for our time together. Well, it's kind of a wet weekend, but God is with us, and we're having a wonderful time with Brother John. Had an awesome time with Sister Pat yesterday out at East Campus and the Manager Executives Fellowship. Oh my goodness, full house, and Sister Pat taught 2 sessions back to back and full of fire the whole time. It's going to be a great day today. I want to talk to you about a controversial subject today. I don't like playing around and ignoring the hard stuff. I think if you're going to teach people how to live, let's teach them the truth. In Proverbs chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "Wine is a mocker and beer is a brawler." New Century Version, or New Living Version says, "Wine produces mockers." People who drink wine turn into a mocker. Wow. So the fruit of drinking wine is that you become what Proverbs calls a mocker. Mocking authority, mocking spiritual leadership, mocking your friends. Wine produces, the fruit of drinking wine is you become a mocker. And beer leads to brawls. People who like to drink beer wind up getting in fights. Now, when you hear verses like that, you say, well, then why did Paul tell Timothy to take a little wine for his stomach's sake? Well, you see, people need to understand there are different words for wine in the Bible: fermented and unfermented and lightly fermented, and juice, fresh wine with just juice freshly squeezed, and then there's the puree, like mango puree, that was boiled down to preserve it. People have forgotten today that when you hear people standing up and teaching you to drink wine, they've learned just enough about the Bible to hurt themselves. Now I want you to be logical with me a minute, and I know the whole new young generation you want to drink. But then, forgive me, my generation did too. We had to back up and ask ourselves a question about wine. Now let me ask you some logical questions for a minute. How can you put a modern definition on a 2,000-year-old word and then make yourself believe that that's what the Bible's teaching? When the Bible speaks of shoes, it's not speaking of shoes like our shoes. When the Bible speaks of clothes, it's not speaking of clothes like our clothes. When the Bible speaks of a home, it's not speaking of a house like we think of a house. We always go back and try to understand the cultural significance of the word that is used, and in culture, what was being said. Now we need to go back and understand the cultural studies of wine. First of all, in the Middle East, it was not a tropical paradise. There were no sugar cane. So the fermentation of wine that would take place would be natural fermentation. And yes, it did produce alcohol. And the fermentation is what made the lamb skins swell, the wine skins swell that Jesus talks about. But the fermentation was very light. Secondly, you have one basic crop of grapes a year. Wine, there was no way for them to stop the fermentation process once it started. So either they drank it when it was very fresh with maybe 0.5% alcoholic content, or they had to boil it down, otherwise it continues the fermentation process and becomes vinegar. So if you don't boil it down into a puree like mango puree, which will kill all the alcohol content in it, then the wine's not going to keep. So basically, they would have one big harvest a year. They would drink the fresh wine at that time, and then the rest would be boiled down into a puree like mango puree from Cebu. And then, according to the Talmud, they would mix 4 parts water to 1 part wine. They would mix 4 parts of water to this 1 part of puree, and there's no way you're going to get drunk on it because the alcohol has all been boiled out of it. Well, Jesus drank wine at the Last Supper, not the alcohol that you're drinking today that you buy in the grocery store. How can you say that, Pastor? Because for wine to be alcoholic, it has to have yeast in it. It has to begin to ferment. That's what produces the alcohol. Now, think with me for a moment. The whole teaching of the Last Supper is that a room had been prepared and all the yeast removed. There could be no leavened bread. It had to be bread made without yeast. And the wine could not have fermented because that would have yeast in the wine. So maybe when I begin to throw a few of these thoughts at you need to go back and quit looking for verses that will make excuses for your lifestyle, and instead maybe come back and go, you know what? I think it's time for me to just stop the drinking in my life completely. Wine produces mockers. Beer produces brawlers.